Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Jamal MMA series. A bit of a switch up here, my first ever interview. Matt, thank you very much for doing this. It's an honour to have you on here. Do you want to just introduce yourself to everybody that's watching us?
So I'm Matt the Beast Bonner. I fight our next gen in Liverpool. The former Cage Warriors Middleweight champion, and I'm back up to middleweight now. Hopefully, should be fighting around November 20th. So just looking forward to that.
Well, that's actually my first question for you. I was going to say, is the move to middleweight official? But obviously it is there. So the first thing I wanted to get onto was, do you feel a bit of a responsibility at Next Gen with being one of the more experienced fighters? Do you kind of feel like you're one of the leaders of that gym, or is it no leadership, everyone does their own thing? Or do you genuinely feel like you have a role to help the younger fighters?
I think for the most part, I think maybe everyone would look maybe to more Molly and Paddy than myself. You know, they're the staples in Next Gen. They've been there longer than me. Although maybe I'm one of the older guys in there. I've only been in Next Gen for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. Where Paddy and Molly have been in there since certainly Paddy, 10 going on 10 years. I would say if I'm kind of going to give any advice there or anything like that, it would be probably the more the amateur guys coming up more so than the fellow professional fighters in the gym. It's more the amateurs who would maybe ask me a few questions or ask me for advice or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, because some people might not be aware of how in depth your record goes back. Does it give you a bit of motivation knowing that some of the guys you've fought before have went on to had success in the UFC? Guys like Mark Madsen, guys like Laurel Murphy, who people might not even know you've ever fought before, because obviously I was as amateur. He was a featherweight now.
Sure.
Does that give you a bit of motivation knowing that you can hang with those guys? Because you both went to decision with both of them. Are both pretty competitive fights as well.
Yeah, it does, and kind of like the Leron Murphy one comes up play more often than the Matt Madsen does. To be fair, it does, and I would probably say, and I think those two guys will probably agree. I'm probably still their two toughest fight. I know we're at different stages in our career, but me and Laron was a scrappy fight. I think I dropped him, and he was trying to punch my head off. It was two just young guys who were just trying to start their careers and trying to have try and win an amateur fight. Mark Madsen, certainly I was his toughest test up to that time, and you won't even be able to find footage of that fight because they never put it up because it was such a tough fight. I think they kind of figured because my record wasn't brilliant at the time that it was going to be another quick win for Mark, but I ended up dropping Mark in the first round and giving him a really good fight. And like I say, you won't be able to find that footage anywhere. But to answer your question, it does. I kind of know what level I can fight at if I'm on the game, if I'm on my ball, and hopefully I can find that kind of form again.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because even never mind the success in the UFC, Mark Madsen was running through everyone, and so like you said, that might be a reason they kind of thought you were going to be a bit of an easy fight than you were, because the beast is never an easy fight for anyone. Another thing I want to talk about was the evolution of not just your game, but the look. If you look at just Matt Bonner as a person a couple of years ago, it's completely different. The beard's coming more, like the full tattoos. Was that a part of just kind of, did you always wanted to get the tattoos, or was that a physical change to match your evolution in MMA?
That was a bit of a strange one because I always kind of quite a cautious person. I don't make any brash decisions, but it was actually I went to my dad's house and I was having a conversation with him, and the tattoos that I've got are Japanese tattoos, and he had these books out on Japanese tattoos and whatnot, and he was like, "Oh, I found this really good tattoo artist in Manchester," and it was his interest. I remember just flicking through this book and like straight away thinking, I'm going to get one actually. Just I had no interest before, I'm not really bothered about tattoos, and I thought, what, I'm going to get one, and it kind of just grew from there. And funny enough, my dad he's ended up getting kind of like pretty much a full. His whole body's pretty much covered in Japanese tattoos now, but yeah, it wasn't really. It's going to be a big change. It's going to be a transition. It was something. And I think the first one I got was after the Frederick fight, and I suppose it was almost like a celebration of that. It felt like a bit of a treat for winning a world title. I was going to win the world title. I was going to go and spend all this money on bloody tattoos.
Another thing I want to talk about is, unless I've got this wrong, you've got 21 pro fights. That's not even including the amateur scene. When you fight guys with kind of less fights in the record, not when you say too inexperienced, but guys like Matthias Frederick, guys like James Webb, who don't have as many fights. When you fight these guys and when you beat them like you did, especially with those two fights in particular, do you feel like you've got a responsibility to teach these guys, this is how hard MMA is when you get to this level? I am experienced. And do you kind of feel like you're showing these guys what level they should be at to compete with guys like you?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, the James Webb fight for me was my best performance by a mile. That was.
Mm.
I don't even think as a fight. I've talked to quite a lot about this to guys in the gym, and you don't really get like perfect fights where everything goes the way you want it to go, and it's kind of goes the way you pictured it before.
Mm.
You visualized it before. I think that was ideal in terms we'd studied James and we'd come up with a really strong game plan. James had been very successful in one area. We kind of knew where he was going to take it and what we were going to do to counter that. And again, I don't really feel like I've maybe performed as well as that. Even the Frederick fight, I probably didn't think I performed as well as I did against James. But in terms of records, I mean, I just got beat by a kid who had about 8 fights, and I say about like 21. So it kind of depends. Cage Warriors is a top promotion. It's got top fighters in there, and you can get beat by guys who've had 2 fights, or you can get beat by guys who've had 20 fights. It's the records really don't come too much into it. What does come into it is the quality that they've fought before. I think that makes more of a bigger deal than maybe the amount of fights you've had previously.
Mm. I mean, you're saying that, but I mean, your most recent wins against Bahia and Khawaja, very dominant as well in those fights. So it's clearly still there. I was thinking about this recently. Do you think Next Gen is one of the most well-rounded gyms in MMA? Because for a while they were known as like the backtake gym, the rear naked choke gym. Guys with select submissions, guys like you, Adam Cullen, Paddy, Adam Wilson, Ventry, guys like
Sure.
that. But then Molly, especially, seems like to be taking it with the spinning back elbows and knockouts. Paddy's had a lot of knockouts recently. Colin, especially, has been seen to mix it up very well on the feet and the ground. Is that something you guys strive for, or is it just that the fighters that guys come to Next Gen seem to be so well-rounded as soon as they get there?
I think the grappling was very much designed by Paul Rimmer in terms of the back take is the highest percentage sub. Let's build a whole system around that. And then when Ellis Hampson has become more of kind of second in command, he's managed to bring the striking up to the par of the jiu-jitsu as well. So, I mean, we did have a coach, Sayardley, before Ellis, and he did a lot of the spinning elbows and things like that we see now in Next Gen. But certainly the striking in terms of an MMA discipline has really come forward from Ellis. I think he's always fought himself. He's been around Next Gen again. He's another guy who's probably been in there for over a decade, and he's managed to fill the gap between striking to takedowns or wrestling to ground and pound. And I think maybe the more proficient striking you've seen is possibly more from Ellis than anybody else. You see his fingerprints on that more so than the other coaches.
So you're saying you want to come back on November 20th. I think that's the show that Cage Warriors are aiming to do in the BT Sports Studios, maybe. I think that's the card.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
they've not been there for a while, I think, since like that Unplugged show they did when Jack Cartwright had all his fights in there.
Right.
But a bit of a busy schedule coming up there. They've got Madison Square Garden, Molly's going to be taking on Aaron Blanchfield. The London card, Nathan Fletcher, I mean, it's come back. And I think the busiest one so far is that Manchester card has got Riley, Cullen, and Adam Wilson. Something I asked you about that card is they moved back up to middleweight. That card is headlined by the middleweight title fight, Christian Leroy Duncan versus Marian Dimitrov. Have you got a prediction for that fight, seeing as you're back in the mix at middleweights?
I think Duncan wins that quite comfortably. Actually, I think he's proved himself. Against Milan, he's mature beyond his years. Duncan, he's very patient. He's got that kind of knockout potential. He's got the highlight reel finish and whatnot. There's not too much on the Bulgarian. I believe he's Bulgarian. There's not too much in terms of I ended up, funny enough, was watching some of his YouTube clips before the fight was announced because I wanted to kind of see possibly if I was going to come up against him at any stage during my career. And he's a southpaw. He seems to be quite well rounded, but he doesn't really seem to really excel at anything. There's nothing that he's not really superb at. Where Christian Duncan, he's very effective at the striking, and he's competent everywhere else. So I do think we'll see Duncan win there by another big finish, and I assume he's probably off to the bigger organisations after defending the belt.
I mean, I can't say I really disagree with you on the prediction for that. I mean, Dimitrov's been off for I think since 2019 as well, so that's definitely a hard task to come back. Obviously, he did get signed just before they announced that fight there. But like you said, Christian Lear Duncan's not one of these kind of guys that come in and take some years and years to figure out their game. I think it was because he had so many amateur fights. That's kind of how he became the level that he's at right now with so little pro experience.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there any interest in the rematch with Jack Milan? Because he's been kind of inactive since the loss to Duncan. But that fight, I mean, people obviously don't really remember the moments from Jack as much. The moments they remember that fight are the moments of you rocking him and like the last burst of like the last 20 seconds of the fight, the Superman punch and everything. When it was like, if there was an extra like even 5 seconds of that fight, Jack would have been completely done because he don't have much left in him. Is there any interest in that, or are you looking more towards guys like Will Curry, anyone else at middleweight?
There would be. Like I say, I'm just in kind of the same boat as you. Where I was wondering what's happened to Milan. You know, where he's disappeared to. You know, I kind of figured he'd be back on the scene by now, but I would fight Milan again for sure. The problem with Milan in terms of, again, Milan was the better man on the day. I've got no excuses at all. But again, it's very hard to find footage of Milan prior to my fight. And then obviously when Milan's come in and he's done what he's done, that gives Duncan a fantastic blueprint then to say, right, Milan's just going to double leg me all the way through. I want to work on my takedown defense. I want to work on my scrambles. I'm going to throw a flying knee or something like that. But yeah, now with maybe a little bit more footage, an idea of what his game plan is, you know, I'd be better prepared for it. But yeah, I would like to Milan. I always like the idea of one of the things about going down to welterweight. The idea was to try and go down there and avenge some losses, you know, against Fleminas or even against someone like Richardson. And obviously, that's not turned out the way I wanted it to. But kind of avenging losses, that always that's enough to motivate you, and that's what kind of like I'm looking for at the moment. It's that real motivation to, you know, get back on track and get that world title back. I feel like I've kind of got my mojo back now, where I almost felt I was a little bit on cruise control for the Oban fight. It was like, well, I'll beat him. Never mind. I'll crack on and we'll have a big fight against Reece McKee. It's you know, I feel like I've got that little bit of fire back. But in terms of opponents, I don't. Will Curry would be a good opponent. He's a guy I've sparred with a couple of times. I think I'd, you know, match up reasonably well with him, and he's on a 3-fight win streak, so he's got to be. He's in a bit of an awkward position because he's lost twice to Christian already. I'm not really sure Cage Warriors know what to do with him as long as Duncan's in Cage Warriors. Once Duncan leaves Cage Warriors, that might open the division up for Will a little bit more. But in terms of fights, again, it's a bit of a strange one because I'm not really sure what the landscape of the middleweight division is anymore because I was focused on the welterweight one. So we'll see. We're going to get this guy. I've got a name of a guy who they proposed. I can't obviously release it until Cage Warriors do, but get this guy done and dusted, get a really good finish, have a great camp, a tough camp, and then see what happens in 2023.
I mean, like you were saying, Will Curry's having a real issue right now trying to get fights booked. I don't know why that's just the guy. They can't find anyone willing to fight him because he's such a dangerous fighter. But I'd even think about that from your perspective, the Jackie fight. I mean, as fans, it's hard enough to find footage of the guy, let alone having to find footage enough when you haven't won up to fight him. Because like you said, you essentially did write the blueprint for Christian. I know how to follow up on it because you didn't know you were going to get with Jackie recently.
That's right.
The one fight with Cage Warriors and a couple of fights you could barely find highlights of on YouTube, but like you said like that. But it seems like the UFC are definitely paying attention to the middleweight division because Leon Aliu is fighting this week on a contender series, the last guy to beat James Webb. So they're obviously paying attention. Something I found a bit interesting was in Cage Wars, and you obviously know this, that no one really holds the belt for that long before either getting picked up by the UFC. Middleweight it hasn't been like that recently because it's been a consistent string of champions from Webb to Frederick to you to Milan to CLD. Sure. Do you think there's a reason that is it because no one could hold the belt for a long enough period of time? Because you're quite active as champion as well. Do you think there's any reason why they've not picked up anyone along that line?
It's a strange one because I remember when I was fighting James Webb, and this was before the James Webb fight, the UFC, Graham Boylan had actually said to Paul Rimmer, listen, if Matt wins James Webb, beats James Webb, he's either going to go to UFC Contender Series or he's going to go and fight for the Cage Warriors belt. And then when I beat James, the kind of feedback was, okay, you're on our radar, but we want you to clean your record up to some extent, and we just need a little bit more. And then obviously, I fought for the belt. I beat Frederick. If I'd beat Milan, maybe then I would have gone to the UFC. But you're kind of right in what you're saying. No one's managed to kind of retain the belt, even for a defense bar Frederick. Frederick beat James Webb, and then he went out to knock out Jamie Richardson. But I even think if Frederick would have beat me, he probably would have got the call up as well to the UFC. He was doing interviews on Sky Sports. He was, saying, come on UFC, come and pick me up. I'm an entertaining fighter. I've got these kind of disabilities, if you want to call it like that. I can kind of, that might endear me to people. It's a strong message for the UFC to have. So I do think if Frederick would have beat me, he would have gone on to UFC. It's just no one's really managed to hold that belt for quite long enough, I think.
I mean, maybe one of the issues, Frederick is a bit of an older guy because some people might forget, but your age does not match the record because you're not an old guy. But the experience does heavily outweigh that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could say the same thing as Jai is that Tyus hasn't really popped up since his fight with you. Even it hasn't been very active. Jai hasn't been doing much either. I was going to ask you this. This isn't as much question myself as for other MMA fighters. Is there a secret to having an amazing chin? Because out of your entire career, you've been finished once. It was a submission. I can't remember you getting rocked that badly. Is it genetics? Is it just training? Is it avoiding wars in the gym? What is the secret to having a good chin in MMA?
I think it's like most things. I think it's probably bits and bobs of everything. I think the main thing is, people say, "God, you've got a great chin, Matt," but then I say to them, like, "Okay, when was I hit really hard though?" And they'll kind of go, "Well, Frederick hit you hard." I say, "No, if you watch that fight, you'll see Frederick. He's mashing up his forearms. That's where the slaps coming from. That's where the sound's emanating from." I've been lucky enough where I haven't really took those big shots in a fight, but I have took big shots in the gym before, and I do think there probably is kind of genetic component to it as well. I think my brother's got the same. We've both got kind of big, solid heads. We've both got decent sized trap muscles, which will stabilize everything. That's almost like your suspension. So yeah, I do think it's bits and bobs of everything. And again, it was almost for me lucky because next gen we do spar reasonably hard, especially leading into camp. On a Thursdays we will beat the shit out of each other. So I think almost it was kind of lucky for me that I went to next gen a little bit later in my career because I hadn't suffered any damage. If I'd have gone to maybe next gen when I was early 20s or something like that, and I picked up all this damage, maybe then maybe I wouldn't still be as lucky I've been now. And I haven't been rocked, been dropped, been stopped or knocked out or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's probably a few of those different things. But I'm not a fan of big gym wars or anything like that. I think we, as fighters, as athletes, we take enough damage as it is without having the ego in the gym and trying to battle away too much in there. The heavy sparring in next gen that's in fight camp. Outside of camp, we won't be sparring as hard.
I was rewatching recently the build up to the fight with you and Tyus, and I don't want to do Cage Warriors this ever. It felt like a bit they were kind of letting you go on the side on that one. It felt like it was like, oh, this is Tyus' last fight. He gets this one done. He's off to the UFC. It didn't really feel like they were giving you much of a chance in that fight. And then you watch the fight. I was actually agreeing with you. It wasn't hitting you that much clean because you're doing keeping the guard up, moving the outside. And then he kind of took us back and smacked him out of nowhere. The commentators even sounded like, oh, it's over. Matt Bonner's the champion. It came out of nowhere. Did you feel like you were being done a bit with disservice in that fight? Because you feel like, I know how good I am. It doesn't matter how they're promoting me. I'm going to go in there. And once it's in my hands, I can do what I want to this guy. Doesn't matter how they promote me. Did you kind of feel like that for the fight week?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a strange one, this, because I mentioned Dan quite often. Dan being the twin brother, and Dan's an elite Thai boxer. He's fourth best in the world and all the rest of it. And I think he kind of suffers with the same kind of thing that I do. It's our face doesn't fit sometimes, and I do think we are slightly underappreciated when it comes to certain things. If people are, say, Cage Warriors, and I'm not slagging off Cage Warriors in the slightest, I love fighting for Cage Warriors, but Cage Warriors might come to the gym and they're recording Paddy and Molly, which is completely understandable, and they'll be video recording Nathan Fletcher and Lee Malloy and Adam Cullen, and you think, fucking hell, I'm one of three people in the room here who've actually won a world title, and you're not filming me, and why don't you want to get my face in there and stuff? And I don't know, it kind of, I've got a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about that, I'm not sure, but I do kind of think maybe, I've not got that massively strong personality that Paddy's got, and I've not got, I'm not like a poster boy face or anything like that. So I do kind of feel there is a little bit of underappreciation there. And again, I think Dan Boy suffers the same. But it is what it is. We have to prove ourselves fighting. If that's the case, maybe that will spur us on, and maybe that's why I'm trying to get good finishes and get my finishing rate up, and maybe appeal to to organisations that way instead of maybe I say be very charismatic and getting their attention that way. But yeah, I do kind of feel what you mean there. I thought that for a long time, and I don't think I've ever mentioned it, but yeah, I do kind of think maybe I don't get maybe as much attention as, say, others. I wonder again if that's to do with age as well. You know, I'm 32 this year. I think I can go on for another 5 years, but the thing is, Cage Warriors and other kind of media, they're always looking for the young, undefeated, good-looking guys. Not so much the 32-year-old potato head. You know, it just is what it is. That's the game.
Does the part of it, you think, because you're surrounded by Paddy and Molly, like if you were the head star of a gym that only real main fighter was you, would that make a difference? Like, or is it because you're from the same gym? Is it, it's the guy from the gym is Paddy and Molly rather than Matt Bonner from that gym? If you were the head of another gym, you think it'd be different?
Possibly, but I think there's kind of pros and cons to that. Like, let's say maybe the pro would be, if I was fighting out of a smaller gym, that maybe I could be the face of that gym and they could promote me this way. But the fact of the matter is, if you're around Paddy and Molly and you get a good few wins and whatnot, the UFC are looking at next gen. The spotlight's on next gen because of how good Paddy and Molly are, and they're dying to say who's the next Paddy. Who else is who's Paddy's teammate, and so. Yeah, okay, it can take away in some ways, but I think probably you get more out of being around Paddy and Molly than you would if you wasn't. Like I say, they've put Liverpool on the map, they put Liverpool gyms on the map, and I think that probably means more than maybe me fighting out of a smaller gym and getting promoted that way.
I was wondering, you obviously do very much appreciate, like you said, you love Cage Warriors as a promotion. Do you appreciate fighting Cage Warriors? Because some fighters, it seems like Craig White, the Welsh guy, he seemed like when he fought in Cage Warriors and he moved to the UFC and he got released and he was like, I'm back Cage Warriors, do I want to finish my career here? Do you sometimes see it as a burden fighting and as the feeder promotion, or do you see it as I'm eventually going to get to the UFC regardless? Or do you feel like Cage Warriors does, not the promotion, but some guys actually do feel like I don't want to be here any longer. It feels like I'm kind of just living my rest of the career rather than getting my highlight in the UFC and getting my prime there.
Yeah, I kind of see both ways there. I love fighting Cage Warriors. I know when I'm fighting Cage Warriors, I know what I need to do. I need to know where I need to be. I know the staff. Ian D, the matchmaker, for instance, I get on really well with him, and he's great. Again, it's a tough question. I think it must be really hard to go to the UFC or go to like one of the bigger shows in the world and then lose and then come back to Cage Warriors. I think, fuck, the money's not as good. I'm not as, maybe I'm not going to get the sponsors that I got before. I think that probably plays quite a large part into it. And I think the only guy who's been able to manage to come back and then go up again would be someone like Nicholas Dalby. But imagine for him, like the transition to come down. I mean, Cage Warriors is a big show, but it's not UFC level in terms of the crowds and the media interest it's going to generate. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy fighting for Cage Warriors. I started the sport because I wanted to fight in the UFC. I would hope that I still, would get to the UFC, but I think I've got 4 fights left on my contract. I did sign a new contract, a small while ago. So listen, we'll see. I get these fights done with, and we'll see where I am, in the division, and we'll see what I want to do next, and what my coach recommends. But I am happy fighting for Cage Warriors. I think I'm probably must be maybe in the top 5 guys with as much fights in Cage Warriors. I've fought over 10 times in Cage Warriors. I think Jimmy Wallhead has fought there like maybe 17 times. I think he's leading that. But what I'm trying to say is I wouldn't have fought in Cage Warriors 10 times if I didn't enjoy doing it. Yeah. It's a good organisation.
It seems like maybe a bit of advantage, like yourself. I mean, Christian Leader Duncan's another one of the guys who isn't rushing his career. He's saying, I won the belt, I'll stay in Cage Warriors for as long as it needs for me to get the experience up. And maybe some guys do kind of slip up on going too fast, moving into that. I was wondering, how does the Cage Warriors kind of matchmaking process go? Because it seems like Cage Warriors announces the fighters on the card and then match makes them rather than making the fight and putting a card. Is that how it works? Do you get told the date and then get told the opponent a lot of the time?
Yeah, it kind of changed. It's changed since COVID, actually, where pre-COVID, we'd get about maybe 8 to 10 weeks where we'd know who we're fighting, we'd know where we were fighting, and we'd have the contract, and then they'd choose to release the fight maybe 5 to 4 weeks before the fight was going to take place to drum up some interest. And then kind of post-COVID, you'd learn who you were fighting about 3 weeks before or 2 weeks before. It was, I think what happened was, they were doing the shows in San Diego and stuff like that, and they were just busier, and so it did take longer for you to find out who you were fighting and all the rest of it. Now it seems like they've got a bit more of a grip on the San Diego. They're a bit more organised. Like I say, I've got a name for November 20th. Whether this guy, I'll end up fighting this guy. Many things can change in that time. But yeah, they seem to be getting back on it now, where it's like we're going to tell you 8 weeks before you fight, because you want a training camp where you know who you're fighting and you're planning for him. Cat's going past there. You're planning for him, and you want that focus. Certainly as a fighter, you want to be switched on. You get that contract and you go, right, okay, I'm switched on now. I'm going to take a different intensity into the gym. So that's generally how they should do it. It's how they used to do it. And I think they're getting back to that kind of position now where they're a little bit more on top of it than say they was before.
I mean, I'm so curious. What was it like in that COVID time in Cage Wars? Because they did a documentary about it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you fight on the first COVID card? Was that the fight with Jamie Richardson? Was that on the first?
I don't know. Yeah, I think that must have been. Yeah, that was when it was kind of like up in the air. Like, are we allowed to do shows, kind of thing? I don't think there really was any rules. It was more like, to be safe, better safe than sorry. We're just not going to have a crowd there. So yeah, it was. I mean, I lost to Jamie Richardson, and then the 3 fights after that, they were all COVID cards, and that's when I obviously won the belt. But in terms of kind of, I felt fine. The crowd being there, a crowd not being there, it really didn't make too much of an impact. The last fight in Cardiff, that was very hostile. Not in terms of like, I don't mean like there was a lot of booing, a lot of kind of like slurs and stuff, but nothing beyond that. But it's a hostile environment. Matt Madsen was a very hostile environment. That's probably the worst place I fought before, but by a mile. But yeah, in terms of kind of COVID and there not being a crowd there or anything like that, it didn't. I enjoyed it. It kind of felt a little bit surreal at the time, and I think you'll look back on there and say, "Oh, do you remember when we fought and there was no crowd there?" It'd be a bit of a novelty. It was quite fun to be a part of, I think.
So obviously your last fight with Oban wasn't in Wales. Do you have to deal with that hostility on the whole fight week when you're out and about, or do you only have to deal with it when you really get to the building and you're in the cage fighting?
Yeah, when you get there, it's a funny game fighting, because it's like people say, "Why don't you want to fight on an Italy card? Don't you want to fight on the San Diego cards?" And you think it doesn't matter where you are, because what happens is you're in the hotel room the vast majority of the time. Yeah. You don't really see people. You don't engage with the crowd. You're in your hotel room. You're cutting weight, or you're after the weigh-in. You're getting food and water down you and whatnot, fluids, and you're trying to replenish. It doesn't play a part until you do that walkout, and then you get in the cage, and you don't really hear the crowd. Well, I don't anyway. It is just that initial 30-second of a walkout where you have to deal with it. So again, it's not really been too much of a problem, that.
And the last thing I want to touch on was, is there any plan for a move back down to welterweight? Because you're talking about this, I was sitting there watching McKee versus Burnson and thinking, man, if Matt Bonner fights Rhys McKee, he's got a really good chance of beating Rhys McKee, probably by submission. Isn't it? Yeah. Because think about it, because I mean, you're not going to have to start again. You're not going to go to fight all these contenders again. Like Oban was very highly ranked at welterweight. Is there any plan of that? Because I don't think it would take too many fights for Cage Wars to be convinced that you would get a title shot back down to welterweight, or is it just middleweight from now on?
Never say never, but when we went back into the room after the Oban fight, pretty much the first words out of my coach's mouth was, "You are never fighting at welterweight again." So you are never fighting at welterweight again. I kind of think I fought at catchweight, 80 kilo initially when I was dropping down from middleweight. So the Hugo Pereira fight and the Joel fight was 80 kilo, and I could kind of feel, certainly in the Joel fight, okay, I dominated and I got a nice win and whatnot, but I didn't quite feel as aggressive and as intense and as switching on as I was. And I kind of felt like, okay, maybe it was a little bit off. Still won. Let's not change if I'm winning fights. I think dropping in those 70s again, it just takes away, the explosiveness. It takes away my endurance. I fought 5 5s with Milan. I did 4 5s with Frederick, and the rounds were tough and the rounds were tiring, but I was able to do those rounds, and like you mentioned before, I even had a really strong finish with Milan. I don't feel like I can do that at that weight. I mean, the last fight, to be fair, was at short notice. I lost 10 kilos in 10 days, which is a reasonably tough weight cut. But I just think anything below 80 or anything below 84 would probably be, I'd be diminished. Now, if I do go on and won the middleweight title belt, and then Cage Warriors said, right, okay, we want you to drop to welterweight to fight Reece McKee, I would probably consider that for sure. Especially if kind of, we had the conversation, he said, listen, the UFC aren't really interested. You can keep fighting that middleweight and keep defending your title, or you can do this. Yeah, I would consider that, and I do think I'd match up really well against Reece. And that would be a fight where you'd have to be switched on. I do feel like I have a lot of advantages with Reece, but that Reece is going to come and he's going to look to do some real damage. So it would be very you'd be motivated to train. But yeah, I think I'm certainly much better at middleweight. My coach said, "Listen, Matt, you've gone from beating elite guys into the division to getting beat by guys who aren't your level," and I kind of I do agree. I do agree with that.
That's interesting, yeah, because you think about the guys you fought middleweight, like Frederick and Milan, two very explosive, well-built guys. You can just look at them, look at Jack Milan, look at Frederick. That the weight cut can take away so much of stuff that you don't even think about. But yeah, that's very interesting to hear. I know I said it wouldn't take too long, but I just wanted to ask you. I want to get through that stuff. Thank you very much for coming on here. Hopefully it isn't the last time. And like you said, November 20th, back in the BT Sports Studios. Opponent to be announced soon, I'm assuming, by Cage Warriors. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on, Matt, and have a great day, mate. Thanks so very much for.
Cheers, buddy. You too. Thanks for having me on. Thank you.